Hi everyone. I think we're here, but I'm sure a few more people will join us as we go on. I'm Donna Smith. I work at Open University. I'm a senior lecturer in politics, and I'm also director of tuition. And I'm also a CDO fellow, a CDE fellow as well, or code fellow, I should say. Welcome to this session. This session is on evolving practice, and we've got two presenters who are 20 minutes each, and then 10 minutes for discussion for each presentation. And we'll take them one by one. So the first presentation is on digital assessment, and that's Marieke Guy from UCL. And then the second presentation is the impact of blended and hybrid learning on intercultural community building of students in HE, and that's Puiyin Wong from the Royal College of Arts. Please do comment in the chat if you have any kind of comments or questions ready for the Q&A, but there'll also be a chance to kind of put your hand up as well. I think we've agreed it'd be really useful for people to keep their microphones off for now, and also when the presentation start, turn the videos off just to kind of help with streaming to make sure that we don't get any issues, and we can kind of turn them back on for the Q&As. So assuming that's okay with everybody, we'll start with our first presentation, which is Marieke.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Do shout if you can't. So hi everyone, and welcome to our session on the Digital Assessment Marathon. So I'm Marieke Guy, and my colleague Isobel Bowditch was meant to be joining me, but unfortunately she's not very well. So I just wanted to say thanks to her for her support with this presentation. And we both work at UCL as part of the wider digital education team. So in this session, I'm going to talk a little bit about the initiative at UCL to move from what was a fairly traditional and quite conservative face-to-face assessment environment to a digital, more future-facing one. I'm also going to talk about our role as digital assessment advisors in supporting this move. So the DAAs, as we're known, have been in post since September 2021. And I'll be using the metaphor of a marathon to talk about our journey. So hopefully it's not too cheesy for you all. Okay, so as someone who's done the couch to 5K a number of times, or tried to, frequently ending back on the couch with a bad back, I know that hope can often trump reality in terms of my running capabilities. And so it's the same really with large-scale digital transformation in educational institutions such as UCL. After every cycle, we need to regroup and create a new starting line, but each time with more experience and more understanding than the first approach. So last year at the RIDE conference, I'm not sure if any of you were there, but Simon Walker, now head of programme development, and Norbert Paschler, provost in digital education at UCL, gave a presentation on developments at UCL, outlining how in 2019 discussions were underway to shift from costly, administratively cumbersome and not always pedagogically appropriate invigilated face-to-face assessments, exams, to a more contemporary digital environment. So it's a really good presentation. It's on the internet, and I recommend you watch it. So they were planning for the long haul. And as I mentioned before, UCL is a large Russell Group institution. And as we all know, cultural change can be slow in HE. Of course, none of us reckoned with the pandemic, which in 2020, for all of us, meant the need for a rapid lift and shift to online assessments so that students could sit their exams and progress to the next academic year. So there was no time or capacity to think about changing our assessment methods or approaches. We just needed to get to the finishing line at that stage. So Simon and Norbert led on a consultation exercise to identify and produce a technical solution. So it needed to address the urgent short-term needs, the continuity and provision, but also provide something that would lend itself to development and improvement of digital assessment practice in the longer term, hopefully in line with strategic ambition towards a more authentic, inclusive assessment method. So the baseline requirements were also that it had to be resilient and cope with a high assessment volume without falling over, and also be integrated with the student's record system with a view to automating as much of that kind of back-end administrative stuff as possible. Wanted it also to offer flexibility in a range of assessment types, including formative and summative. So we went for a platform called WiseFlow. It was the platform that was identified as the best fit. It's already in use by the OU and Brunel and other institutions, and it's been around for a number of years, so it's got a really solid track record in delivering exams. It's a dedicated assessment platform, one with a kind of one-stop shop approach, but as you can see in this diagram, which is the UCL assessment journey, it covers all of these different areas. and the possibility of creating and managing all the different aspects of the assessment journey end to end were within this system. So as well as the operational benefits, it offered the potential to support a wide range of assessment types, including large file formats, double and blind marking, allowed us to share rubrics and a range of question types and so on. And so at UCL, we've been referring to WiseFlow as assessment UCL. So just in case I use that term, that's the term that we've used for both. Okay, so we had this new technology and we also brought in, there was a new assessment operating model. So that was kind of a regulatory framework designed to create a more consistent and fair assessment experience for our students. Also clearer guidance and sort of for staff on how it related to different assessment types. So the model deals with things like reasonable adjustments and what to do in the event of a technical failure, timescales and all that sort of thing. So for the 2020 to 21 academic year, the use of WiseFlow was generally restricted to one type of exam, requiring students to upload PDF submissions, and the process was really heavily supported by our central assessments team in terms of the administrative burden. So there were some other kind of small scale pilots that were happening using other different assessment types as well, but really much more exploration was needed. So after a big review of what happened in 2021, what we knew about the platform, so the knowns, were very much that it supported PDF uploads really well. It provided a really robust environment and it hadn't buckled under the strain of our high number of exams. And it provided a really great student experience. And so 94% at the time had managed to submit without any issues. But unfortunately, the experience of the markers wasn't quite so smooth, and this was identified as a key enhancement priority. So in the first year of the implementation, UCL only explored a real fraction of the capabilities of the platform. And then going forward into 2021, we've kind of moved into this known unknowns area. So this was things like, you know, what would happen if demand started to merge, we came out of COVID, what kind of level of technical support would be required, what range of assessments could we be using on this platform, how could the platform meet this kind of complex and diverse mix of departmental assessments and marking and different feedback approaches as well. So in the summer of 2021, before I started, it was agreed to bring in a dedicated team to support the university with our digital assessment ambitions. So our first task as a team, the Digital Assessment Advisory Team, was the rollout of WiseFlow for the next academic year. So we knew we had a platform that could do a lot of things, but we didn't know if it could do what was needed or wanted by academic departments. So it was our job to work on this kind of known unknowns and start to really reveal these unknown unknowns. So we did this by being embedded within the faculty. So I'm actually the lead for population health, life sciences and maps and physical sciences, very STEM heavy subjects. And we all were responsible for different faculties. And we started to work with the faculties in partnership to identify how digital assessment might support their assessment and feedback ambitions, and particularly how WiseFlow might be a good fit for these as well. We sort of looked beyond WiseFlow, but we were focusing very much on WiseFlow. So the faculty learning technology leads, this is a group of people who had already been established within the faculties, and this is working really well, sort of as apart from that sort of central model that we use as well at UCL. And so we've been working quite closely with these faculty learning technology leads, as well as what we call the Arena Teaching and Learning Centre colleagues, and also a newly developed programme development team as well. So we're working very much with all these different people. So while we're getting up to speed on the platform, we're also developing training and support materials and working with the faculties to explore the suitability of WiseFlow for their assessments. So it's a very role-based platform. And what we did was we developed 4 role-based training sessions. So the author sessions, the manager, the reviewer, and the, I've forgotten the other role as well, typical. But since joining, we've delivered 60 sessions, 400 attendees. And I think we've had over 21,000 staff have watched those training videos online, and over 28,000 unique views on guides as well. So they've really taken this training on board. And we've also run bespoke departmental sessions. We've run weekly drop-ins, and we're starting to move to more kind of pedagogic areas. So we're looking at MCQs and rubric workshops and assessment design. So it's very much an ongoing process of discovery. And one thing we were very wary of was not over-promising and under-delivering. So some people really sort of took to the technology and wanted to run with it, and others not so much. But we also recognise that training isn't enough. It's only part very much of the picture. So I really like this quote from Emma Mayhew, shared by a colleague of mine. But we're starting to realise that we need to understand a lot more about user needs and perspectives, in particular, around departmental cultures. So the kind of the range of assessment types, their ways of working, their marking processes, and general culture within the department. Also the focus of enhancements, we're being responsive in feeding back issues encountered, but are we focusing on the right sort of things? Are we trying to fix the technical issues that actually maintain ways of doing things, or that are not actually affected the transformation? So what's the long-term aim of all of this? Just to say, Tim Thorns, who is who's really writing some interesting stuff at the moment in this area, and his great resources on post-digital technology, talks about technology and pedagogy as being entangled. So we're constrained by affordances of technology that need to be wary of technological or pedagogical determinism. So when the technology is seen as the driver of change, so we don't want to be in that situation. So one of the most challenging aspects of any digital transformation project is ensuring you include and consult stakeholders. So in our positions as DAAs, we're clearly playing a role of a conduit between different teams and different agendas. We're working with our faculty professional services staff and the faculty academics, but it's really important that we understand, as I said already, what's happening in each faculty. So one of the early decisions our team made was that we would write a series of landscape reports that provide a snapshot of assessment activity in the faculty. So these include the type of assessments being delivered, the tools being used, and how the administrative team and support works. So these reports pull in various case studies. These are being created through interviews and conversations with people in faculty. You can see one of the case studies, which is actually published live now, but it's not so much as a report as a conversation with the faculty. So hopefully we'll be able to use these to inform future practice. We're also working with the product team, who are responsible for the new assessment platform. So they're a really technical team and follow agile methodology. We find ourselves in this position where we are sort of translating between the two groups. For example, they were very keen to use the terminology onboarding, and this kind of confused people a little bit. So we've tweaked the terminology and come up with slightly more accessible language for our faculties. It really does feel like it's about starting conversations with different groups and different people. So I like to think of it as an institutional-wide dialogue on assessment. It's a real balance between the technical aspects and the pedagogy, but it's a great conversation. So one of the most important stakeholders in all of this, of course, is the students. So as a team, we've been involved in supporting a team of students known as the Assessment Design Student Partners in a kind of mini project. The purpose of the project was to develop a staff-student partnership to help solve some of the module and programme level assessment challenges. Also to develop the students' understanding of assessment and raise awareness of assessment literacy. So long-term, the aim is to upskill these students so they can play a substantive role in what we're calling the Learning Lab. So this is a new idea in development. These students, they had 21 hours in total to work on their role, and they focused on either the new digital assessment platform, including participation in an assessment mini hackathon, or looking at the UCL chart tool, which is a tool developed by Simon Walker that visualizes the assessment diet from a module or program perspective. So working with the students inspired me to encourage a module team I was working with in neurology to apply for a student changemaker project funding. So the project involved a cross-services team comprising of academics, professional services, support staff, and students exploring different approaches to assessing using short answer question assessments. So insights from the work they carried out were fed back to the essential assessment team. And you can see a picture here of one of the students presenting at the recent UCL conference. So earlier in the year, a group of academics and students and digital assessment team and lots of other people also got together with Uniwise, the suppliers of the WiseFlow platform, and we met together to participate in an assessment hackathon. So we brought different people together and attendees were split into groups and started to think about how digital assessments could look like in the future. We've also followed this up with more work with the platform team and with JISC. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I mentioned the UCL Education Conference. So this year the theme was transforming education. So the Provost, President and Provost, Dr. Michael Spence, opened the day by talking about the need to get assessment right and the rest will follow. So it's really high priority in our institution. So many of the assessment challenges we're facing were discussed openly. And the picture you can see here is from our assessment tree that the DAA Marketplace had at their stand at the conference. So here we try to encourage staff to make an alternative assessment pledge and hang it on our tree. So what next? It's very much an iterative learning process. The assessment operating model for this year divided assessments into lots of different defined categories. For unseen written exams, the default operating model was controlled condition exams, where the duration accurately reflected the amount of time a student should spend on the assessment, and where the regulations sort of replicated the strict conditions in the face-to-face exam hall. So that was an approach tried this year. I think it had significant benefits for both student wellbeing and academic integrity. So while the academic integrity is much improved, in contrast to the 24-hour assessments of COVID times, there's been a few other issues. So for example, the students are given a strict 20-minute upload window, and there's been cases of students not really submitting in time. So it's been a bit of a harsh learning curve for all. We're not sure yet what next year's operating model will bring, but while some departments will want to return to face-to-face assessments, the institution as a whole is really committed to digital assessments. So we've got cases of people moving onto the platform and off the platform as well. And we'll soon be having the results of the staff and student surveys. So we'll be able to look and we'll kind of have another look and rethink how we're doing things. As a team, we kind of know that digital assessment needs to offer something attractive and different. It needs to be really appealing to staff and students and not just bring its own set of issues. I mentioned that I'm responsible for population health science, and we've also recently had some really positive feedback from the postgraduate taught experience survey, the PTES. It very much focused on students having the opportunity to apply their knowledge and develop their skills and critical thinking. So they really like different and varied types of assessment, the real life applicability and really kind of intellectually stimulating topic areas. Staff themselves need loads of support with areas that are technology agnostic, so making assessment authentic and relevant, marking workload, assessing large cohorts, ensuring formative assessment is effective, assessment literacy, PSRBs and regulatory requirements and how you deal with those. So there's a lot to take in and a lot to do really. Just to end, so where does this all lead us? So the picture that I've shared here is from our UCL Education Awards that happened, I think it was the week before last. And we have a new Vice Provost, Professor Kathleen Armour. It's likely to be quite a lot of change of direction as of travel as an institution, and it's all very much emerging, and we're very conscious of that. There clearly isn't a finishing line in sight, and we aren't going to have done assessments as an institution or as a sector. To be honest, we're still unclear on what assessment really means, and that's something that's very much evolving. I mean, I recently attended a really excellent small JISC event looking at what assessment could look like in 2035. I mean, at the end of the day, the facilitator pointed out that actually the group of us had redesigned education rather than assessment with our ideas. But I mean, I think that's because the two are intrinsically linked. But one of the things that did occur to me was how little we discussed particular platforms at this event. In the future, it feels like technology is very much something that fades into the background in a kind of supporting role, there to help with administrative tasks, but never taking away the need for people. Technology can get in the way of practice, and I know we want to avoid that technological determinism, but I do feel it can also support change. So as UCL's assessment decisions have created many opportunities. They've driven conversations about academic integrity, collusion and contract cheating, about the awarding gap, about inclusion, diversity and authentic approaches. And these are really important conversations about what we value as an institution. While we don't want our institution to be led by a technology platform, it can be this incredible driver for change. So I think UCL has been really brave to go on this assessment journey, or assessment marathon as I was talking about it. While the finishing line is in sight yet, and you could say there is no finishing line, but I think we're definitely on our way, and that's the key there. thanks so much to everyone for listening. I've just shared my email address there for anybody who wants to get in touch and discuss any of that further.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marieke. And you finished kind of bang on 4:20 by my clock. So that's perfect timing. By a massive coincidence, actually, at the Open University, we are bringing in WiseFlow with UniWise. A lot of the issues you've talked about are things that we're kind of grappling with at the moment as well. So it's been really interesting to kind of hear about your experiences. We've got lots of questions in the chat box. And as I said earlier, people are able to kind of put their hand up if they want to ask a question, but we'll start with the stuff in the chat box first. But I'm going to have kind of chair's prerogative and have the first question. I just wondered whether WiseFlow has led to kind of innovation in assessment or has impacted assessment in ways that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I think there's some really interesting things that can be done with a platform. So one, for example, we've been exploring using it in maps within earth sciences, and we've been doing stuff with MCQs with negative marking, which is quite interesting. But also what happens is you can get some really great data out the back of that as well. So they're using a lot of that to inform future teaching and kind of looking at kind of areas that students are really struggling with. And so that's been quite an interesting one. What else we do? There's lots of stuff around academic integrity and using that in some ways. And while we actually really want to go back and sort of redesign some of those assessments, I think there are some approaches that have been taken that are quite interesting. So, for example, giving students different papers is potentially one area, possibly with different data sets as well, something that we've looked at a little bit. So yes, I think I created a really interesting presentation. Well, I thought it was quite good, presentation for the UCL conference, the education conference, which looked at inspired assessments, and that was sort of thinking about new ways of doing things. So there were some ideas on there, including things like use of video assessment, which I really hope we'll be able to do more of in the future. Group, we're starting to look more at group work on the platform. So I think it has great potential. Obviously, we want to do that in a very supported manner, make sure that we work with our academics to create those ideas. And we're pulling those together as well as a series of case studies. So I know that was something else I asked for in the previous session, and hopefully we'll be able to share that kind of practice beyond UCL and with the sector as well.
Thanks. That kind of emphasises, doesn't it, that so, this is a big change programme. It's not something which can be done quickly necessarily. It has to kind of be done at a pace which is going to work for staff, students, and not going to cause too much kind of chaos, really. In terms of questions in the chat box, one of the first questions I'll go to is that you mentioned, well, in the panel earlier, it was mentioned that students often want kind of familiar exam setups because they're kind of, they're familiar with it, they're good at it, etc. So have students responded well to this kind of new format and kind of online exams generally, or have you had any kind of negative feedback saying they want to kind of go back to kind of face-to-face? I mean, we've just in the process of doing our student survey, so there'll be a lot of results back from that, but we have the results from last year. On the whole, students have taken to this like a duck to water in contrast to some of the sort of academic stuff, but so on the whole, most have really enjoyed it, and there are obviously some benefits for certain groups as well doing it in this way. I think there are things that we've learned this year, so it's very much about supporting students through that kind of submission process. So we have a series of practice exams that we've asked students to do. Some students have done them, others haven't. So I think there's a little bit of work there to do about making sure students are very familiar with the environment, making sure that they've tried out their own technical setup so that they don't have any issues when they first suddenly get onto the platform and start doing their session, their exam. I think there's still work to be done in certain areas. I mentioned the STEM subjects, so there's still certain subject areas will do their, so for example, maths is a very difficult one because students tend to write their results because it's very difficult to use something like LaTeX to do an online exam. So there still needs to be a lot of work there. But we're doing our best to support them through this process. There's been a lot of really great central comms coming from the central assessment team. Thank you. Another question which has come in, and it's something that I was interested in as well. Like at all universities, academic integrity is a really big thing, and you discussed it in your presentation. Did you have any awareness of collusion via, for example, WhatsApp doing the kind of online assessment? And if you did, how did you kind of mitigate that?
Yeah, I'm not really aware of what goes on in the WhatsApp groups, but we are, obviously collusion comes up as we do sort of plagiarism checking and start to notice. But as I mentioned, this case where we actually had multiple different papers, and because of that, we were able to see that students had colluded on certain questions. So we have been able to identify cases. I mean, obviously it's quite sad because you have to take those cases through, and there's a whole plagiarism case there. But we're hoping that these type of practices will make sure that students don't do this type of thing in the future, that they almost kind of feel that it's not worth the effort. So yeah, we are aware that there's things going on, and it's just identifying that and finding ways to support it. But I still go back to, I think assessment design is a real key here with avoiding collusion. So, and that's an area we're really looking at.
I agree. I was in a meeting earlier and we were talking about this. It's about kind of designing opportunities for plagiarism and collusion out of assessment, isn't it? Rather than kind of dealing with it.
Yes, and we are actually working on an academic integrity design toolkit, actually, which will help with those sorts of things, because I think if you can design it out, so some of the example case studies that we're looking at are very much more, they're ones that you can't cheat on because of the way they're designed, because they're very personal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. A couple of more kind of, I guess, kind of technical questions, but as someone who kind of is familiar with WiseFlow, I kind of, you know, we've come across these issues as well. I'll kind of put two together. What did you do with students who fail to upload in the strict window? Do you accept the submissions, or is it simply closed?
That's still part of an ongoing conversation as an institution. It's something it is only a very small number, and the vast majority of students, and I'm afraid I don't know, I can see someone's asking about the statistics. I don't know the exact statistics. I don't think they've actually got fully, because we've only just come out of the assessment period. They haven't got those statistics to hand yet, but so it is a very small number. I think we're working out, and it's quite a sort of process of going through and trying to understand, you know, the reasons why that happened and various other things. But I think it is something we are aware of. It's really difficult balance. Obviously, if you were in a face-to-face situation, someone would physically take that paper away from you. But we don't want to give students additional time if that gives them an unfair advantage. So it's just a real balance. And I think it's something that we're still working our way through as an institution. So, yeah.
Possibly have time for one more question, but we might have time for more. So if you have anything, please put it in the chat box. I just wondered if you could give a bit more information about kind of staff opinion on, you know, the kind of the move to online. You've mentioned at various times about, you know, some places moving back to kind of face-to-face, etc. Do you have any kind of more kind of detailed feedback, or any kind of more feedback about kind of how staff have taken to it? As I said earlier, it's a big kind of change program, isn't it? And you know, in that sense, it's kind of work. So just some more thoughts on that would be interesting.
Okay. So I think what happened initially was everybody had to move onto the platform, and it is used for centrally managed exams now. And I think that's a tricky one, because in a change management process, you want to bring people along with you very much. But what we're trying to do now as digital assessment advisors is work more on these, not pilots necessarily, because we're using the platform, but these kind of work more with academics who want to try something out. So we have quite a few cases now of entire departments wanting to move over. So we're supporting them, and we're trying to come up with really good guidance and lead them forward. So I think it's really important that we work with the academics. We just get a much more successful outcome if we do that, and we also open their eyes to the fact that this is still a work in progress. We're working with the WiseFlow team to bring in lots of enhancements, and the WiseFlow development team have been working incredibly hard to do those, bring those in time. But we're defining this platform, we're creating this platform, and that, you know, that's a positive thing. So we try to sell it to people if they want to use the platform, and then their experiences are shared with us, then the platform long term will improve for their benefit, you know. So it's a kind of enhancement process. But obviously not everybody is on board, so we also try to support different ways of using it. So while there's real advantages marking online, we also support offline marking if that needs to happen, and we also support the administrative team to support the academics as well. So we try to feel like it's a very supportive environment, you know, but the institution is very committed to the platform, so it's, you know, that's the way things are going. So I think we're getting a lot of engagement, which is a good thing.
Thanks very much, Marieke. And again, perfect timing. As I said, it's been really interesting hearing about your experiences, because by coincidence, I didn't know this ahead of the session, we're bringing the system in as well. So I will certainly be.
If you want to get in touch, yeah.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, we'll be talking about this some more at my own institution. So it's been really useful just to kind of hear how it's gone and the kind of the things you've done to kind of deal with certain issues, etc. So thank you so much, Marieke. And I'm sure if anyone has any other questions, they can put them in the chat box, and you can ask them before we finish the session. So I'd like to welcome our second participant now, which is Puiyin from the Royal College of Arts, who will be talking about the impact of blended and hybrid learning on intercultural community building of students in HE. As before, we've got 20 minutes and then 10 minutes for questions. Please put any questions in the chat box, and then we'll all come together for the Q&A at the end. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Excellent. Just gonna share my screen. Okay. So hi, I'm Puiyin Wong from the Royal College of Art. I'm a learning technologist there. I'm also a PhD researcher at the Educational Research Department at Lancaster University. So as Donna sort of talked about the title of my session, I'm not going to repeat that because I realized it's a bit of a mouthful, and I only realized it after I submitted the proposal. But what I really wanted to find out in this study, which was part of my PhD from last year, was even how we can build intercultural communities via the use of technologies, because that has been the case for the majority of us in the last couple of years. Distant learning wasn't really a choice as much as it was more of a something we had to do as a result of circumstances we all face. And I guess I was also partly inspired by my own experience as a fully distant PhD student. I've never been to Lancaster. I'm not expected to go to Lancaster, but it hasn't stopped me from forming so many wonderful friendships with my classmates. So I kind of wanted to know if my very positive experience is echoed by other students from other institutions as well. So that's kind of why I wanted to do this study. Now, before I kind of show you the findings and discussion and what have you, I think it's customary for me to give you some definitions of what blended and hybrid are. I'm sure you know, but as we all know, something we do very well in higher education, which is we don't agree with things at the best of time. So I'm going to give you the definitions I've chosen to use for this study. That's not necessarily mean they are the definition that you have used for your own teaching and learning. So blended learning is the thoughtful integration of classroom face-to-face learning experiences with online experiences. So that's both synchronous and asynchronous study activities. But this study obviously focused more on the online experience because of my interests, as I've just told you about. Hybrid learning is when a synchronous session is attended by both students and by students both in the classroom and online. So as a learning technologist in my day-to-day job, I've supported many staff and students who, particularly in the last couple of years, who want to somehow recreate or replicate the kind of corridor chats, the 5 minutes here and there between sessions, or let's go to the pub together at the end of a long day. Those kind of organic social interactions, something what they really missed, and they really want to somehow replicate it. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is distant learning can be a lot more mechanical. And so I kind of want to know if we can somehow make it more interesting in some ways. So what really missing here is the social presence between the students, which in my opinion is the most important aspect of an overall educational experience. So I'm sure you are familiar with this framework. If you're not, it's the community of inquiry framework. I'm sorry, I had a big dentist appointment this morning, so my mouth is actually on fire. I do apologize if I'm slurring my words slightly. So the community of inquiry framework, as you can see in the middle, is the educational experience, and it consists of 3 types of presence. Now, this study or this presentation really just focused on the social presence, which in my opinion, like I said earlier, is the most important aspect of an education experience. That is student collaboration, how they engage with each other. It does involve teachers' intervention to create opportunities, but by and large, it is something that the student themselves would have to be willing to engage with the activities. That is, I believe, when a group of learners that we pull together, when they're willing to engage with each other, that's when a group of learners become a community of learners. So the willing engagement is the key here. So I'm just going to go through some of the key findings, and then we can talk about why the findings are the way they are. So bearing in mind, this is a small scale study, so the sample size is relatively small. 23 students took part in a survey with some open text field questions, so I could get some qualitative data from them. And then 5 colleagues from HG took part in semi-structured interviews. So this is by no means a sector-wide representation at all, but it is a collection of some opinions of what's been happening in the last couple of years. So some of the key findings from the students with regards to the blended learning experience. 43% of them felt they had overall good experience in terms of developing a sense of community. And bearing in mind, the question I asked in the survey were quite specific. It wasn't about, how you're doing with your studies, all that kind of stuff. It was really focusing on their sense of community. So 43% was all right, I guess. 56% of them, so just over half of them, felt that remote learning has affected their peer engagement, but they felt it's important to get to know their peers from the same and different cultures. So there are some barriers there with online learning, because they want to get to know their peers, but they're not really getting that sort of interaction, their engagement. And also the same number of students felt that the tutors help them, although they're not physically on campus. So that's good to know. Having said that, oh, sorry, I forgot to show you the next slide. Did I? Sorry. Yes, so 39, sorry, I was like I said, I'm in quite a bit of pain, I do apologize. So 39% of students felt comfortable with intercultural interaction online, but they were also worried about their words being misunderstood, particularly with asynchronous communication. Their words in written forms could be misunderstood, which is probably why only 39% of students felt comfortable, as much as they felt that online collaboration can help them to increase their cultural awareness. So they want to, but they're reluctant to. And I think there are many key factors at play here. One of which, and this is me talking as a learning technologist above all else, is the lack of understanding from staff about what blended learning really is. Uploading a bunch of video online isn't blended learning, it's just uploading a bunch of video online. It isn't trying to replicate an in-person experience. And also, some of the students have highlighted the lack of classroom management has really affected their engagement. So, for example, some students were more relaxed in terms of arriving to a session late and leaving early, or open eating a bowl of cereal on camera, all that kind of stuff could be quite distracting for the students, so they don't like it. And another factor that was at play was some student was saying they felt that some of the classmates didn't seem to have a filter anymore. So they say anything that comes to their mouth, things that are offensive, things that are not really well considerate, were said that they might not have experience in an in-person classroom. So again, it goes back to the classroom management being an issue. I just wanted to share 2 contrasting quotes for you, because not everything is bad, but let's start with the bad first. The technology and behavioral barriers were not addressed, making the experience almost entirely negative. So as I said earlier, the classroom management was a big issue. And if the students are put off by technology, if the students are put off by their peers' behavior, then forget about engagement. And if you can't engage, then there's no community. It's as simple as that. But like I said, it's not all negative. Some students felt that, for example, the student from Hong Kong, who's based in the US, felt that I'm more engaged because I'm less intimidated by the thought of confrontation, since I'm not really in front of anyone. I'm sure that sounds familiar to you. You know, some quieter students, they all of a sudden seem to have found their voice. Well, they haven't. It's just that we have provided an alternative platform for them in the last couple of years for them to feel more comfortable being around their peers. And being comfortable around people is a key to engagement, which I'll come back to that later, because it's also to do with cultures, which is the key of this presentation. To quickly risk through some of the founding from, again, student experience from hybrid learning particularly. Again, this is to do with their interaction with the classmate, not to do with the overall experience, okay? So 50%, so half of them found it's really hard to engage with a classmate in different dimensions. So the online students found it really hard to engage with a student who could go on campus and vice versa, which is why 55%, so essentially the same percentage of students felt that hybrid learning has created a two-tier system. So the two trips of students, the online and the in-person on-campus student, there's like a brick wall between them. They just couldn't communicate for whatever reason. Only 44% of the students felt that their tutors have continued with blended learning activities, and that's disappointing because hybrid as a learning mode, in my very strong opinion, is a bit of an issue. I'm not saying people are not doing it well. I know some people who are doing hybrid really well, pedagogically and technologically speaking, but by and large, in my experience, most people are not. You know, having a trolley in the classroom and having students just appearing on a screen, you're talking to a classroom as normal. That's not hybrid. That's just, I don't even know what it is. Okay, so and to kind of respond to the two-tier system, we really, you know, the blended learning is something that we could bridge the gap between the two groups of students if we really have to put them in two different categories. Okay, there's this, so the lack of blended continuous blended learning provisions, probably why 72% of the students felt that it was so particularly easier to ignore their classmate online when they can interact with each other in the classroom. You can just turn around and talk to your classmate next to you, because that's what we're so used to since the beginning of time. Talking to people through a computer screen is not normal. This was, you know, so earlier, just a moment ago, offering blended activities is important because it really helps bridge the gap. But do we really know what we're doing? Because a mixed rate student in the UK have said the majority of the interaction has been despite staff rather than through the facilitation. I wasn't particularly surprised by this sort of comment because there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding what blended learning is. And I think that contributes to that. And there's another clue I wanted to show you that's quite upsetting for me as a foreigner to the UK, but also very true. And it's a real issue that is more of a real issue than we care to admit. We cannot change people. Students and or tutors will always ignore international students, would do so either in person or online. Feeling excluded even before the pandemic, it was common. Now the matter is worse. I just feel sad when I heard that, because it is a real issue and we need to address that. So there are some contradictions with the foundings and from the student experience, with hybrid perhaps being less favorable. And I think this is to do with, you know, I've mentioned some students feel they're being ignored, you know, their voice aren't being heard. I think that's to do with, above all else, the lack of understanding of how cultures play a role in how students behave, or how we behave as human beings. So before I give you a brief summary of the founding for the staff, I just wanted to talk about this one thing, and I'm going to say his name really wrong. Is the Geert Hofstede cultural dimension. Now, I'm not going to give you a lecture on this because there's so much really interesting resources online, so I highly recommend it. But the cultural dimension basically consists of two isms, individualism and collectivism. So individualism celebrates the I, so people are encouraged to speak their mind and engage in debates, discussion, confrontation is healthy. Making self-centered decision is normal. What's going to benefit me? What do I want to do that would make me feel happy is part of the individualism. Collectivism, on the other hand, values the we. Group harmony is important. The harmony of a society is important. Decisions are made based on the influence of the group that they belong to. So a lot of students from collectivist countries tend to be passive learners, which is why, on the one hand, online interaction, blended learning have created different channels, different opportunities for them to find their voice. I'm putting this in quotation marks, for them to feel comfortable that they can speak, but just not right in your face. But on the other hand, because the students don't speak as easily, perhaps, they can so much easily just fade into the background, because it is so much easier to ignore someone when you're in an online meeting, because they're not actually physically in front of you. And I think this is the fact that's been proven in some of the foundings I've shown you. So I just want to quickly show you some example of the 8 countries I randomly selected. There's a website, I'll give it to you at the end of the presentation. You can go on, type in any country, and it gives you a score. As you can see, probably unsurprisingly, China scored the lowest with 20, United States 91, so day and night. That go in some way to explaining why sort of Asian students, as it were, are sort of quieter and they're not as engaging as the sort of Western students. It's just a different way of how we process information, I think, and our cultural roots as well. So where does it leave us with helping or encouraging students with intercultural community building? I'm gonna, instead of sharing the foundings, the 5 colleagues I interviewed, I wanted to share the questions they asked me in the interviews. Now, bearing in mind my interview with them, they asked me questions that I felt it was quite thought-provoking, and I'm hoping that by asking you these same questions, you can take away with some thoughts as well. The first question is, are we simply connecting students, or are we building a community? Which is which? Do we even know? Do we really understand what a community is? And the last one goes back to the kind of cultural dimension. Do every single one of them care about being part of a community? Or do some of the students just want to come and learn whatever they want to learn, come to the UK, go to the US or whatever, do a 3-year degree and go home and be a successful, whatever they choose to be? Bearing in mind the individualism and the collectivism I mentioned earlier, not everyone necessarily want to be or care or feel comfortable about making friends with people around the world. So are we really projecting what we think is best for our students onto them? Have we even asked them, hey, do you really want to make friends with your classmate, or do you just want to come here and learn and go home? You know, because one thing that's quite important to remember is collectivist students, so against those scored the lowest in the individualism score, so tend to be kind of Asia countries, but you know, it's not always the case. Collectivists are also exclusionalists, so which means that they feel much more comfortable, or shall I say, we feel much more comfortable being with our own people. So it's not easy for them to accept outsiders. This gap that you're seeing today is taking years of practice. Okay, so 5-6 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do a presentation like this because, you know, I come from a collectivist background. Okay, so So that is the kind of cultural dimension, the cultural sort of aspect I wanted to talk about. I don't have any recommendation for you in terms of how do we build an intercultural community from a cultural point of view, because I don't know. But let us assume that we are all happy in a world where everyone wants to get along and we want to support our students and all our students want to form their community. Are we, as practitioners, as educators, are we capable of doing this from a technological point of view? Because a lot of the practice I've seen over the last couple of years, and certainly from the interviews I had with my colleagues, so those are 5 highly respected educators in the UK and in the US, they were saying a lot of the practices they're seeing are nothing more than, as one of them described, as a life jacket. And the other one described a lot of the things he's been seeing as we just couple something together, keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. Because it seems to me that we just can't wait to get back on campus. And that's fine, but there's a lot of value with distant learning, there's a lot of value with blended learning, there's a lot of value with what we've been doing in the last couple of years. So I just want to leave you with one thing that was widely circulated on social media. You would have seen hundreds of times in 2020. That seems to have faded away, and I kind of want to bring it back to your attention, which is the Daniel Stanford bandwidth immediacy matrix. The thing itself is very self-explanatory, but fundamentally it asks one question: does everything need to be live? If it doesn't, think about different ways of engaging with students. Think about what alternatives can there be other than just talking at the student. Because one key thing, as I keep saying earlier, is we need to make sure the student are willing to engage with each other. So the first thing to do is to look at activities, how we can design activities that would enable them to build a confidence, to enable them to find their voice in the community that we're trying to build, to provide equitable opportunities for students from both individualist and collectivist societies, because willing engagement is the first step towards being a community. If they're not willing to engage, they are just a group of learners who just happen to be in the same class. So I've run out of time. I'm going to stop talking now. I don't have a slide of my references, but I've got a list, so I'm going to drop it in the chat now. That's all right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you for kind of powering through after having treatment this morning. We really appreciate it. We've got some questions and some comments, so we'll get started. I want to kind of finish maybe 1 minute to 5, so people can get into the keynote at 5 o'clock without having to kind of rush. One of the questions we've got is, do you think that the drive back to face will end up further isolating some students, especially those that are unable to return to institutions due to COVID restrictions?
I think so, yeah, absolutely. Because I've just dropped the reference list in the chat. So obviously my paper also covered other issues about digital inequality and other equality issues as well. So yes, I think the drive to go back on campus will definitely do that, because there are students who want to go on campus. They want to kind of, as I said earlier, they like the corridor chat. They want to go to the pub together. The social aspect is important, but there are students who just want to go and learn. Adult learners, for example, who have family responsibilities, caring responsibilities. Making friends with 18, 20 years old probably isn't at the top of the list. So, and I've seen institutions, without naming name, who have actually force their student to go on campus as for this academic year, and it's quite sad that they have to do that. And I think it's to do with certainly in the UK, because I can only speak about the UK education. A lot of our universities, our reputations are built on campus in-person experience, the brick and mortar. Without that, the powers that be are worried what's going to happen next. And also there's also the absurd belief that online learning is cheap and second class. It isn't. Open University being a very good example, it isn't. the Education and Research Department at Lancaster, where I am doing my PhD at, most of the PhD programs are distant learning, and they churn out good researchers. So, yeah. Sorry, I've just gone off on a tangent now. So.
No, it's really interesting. I think, you know, we're going to have the chance to kind of, you know, discuss these issues across different sessions as well. So it's always important to kind of get kind of, you know, kind of full answers to questions. I think we have time for kind of one more question. I've just been told we have to finish about 3 minutes to get everyone into the next room. So you mentioned a kind of a lack of filter. Do you think the lack of filter is similar to the lack of filter seen with social media use? Are there some similarities or spillover effects?
I think social media is worse because we all have different digital identities. You know, I am very different on Instagram than I am on Twitter, and then I am working with people than I am a student at Lancaster. So I think the lack of filter on social media is worse because I'm also known to putting my foot in my mouth on social media, but I wouldn't do that with my classmates. So I think the lack of filter between classmates is actually less severe. And also, I mean, you know, there are, let's put it that way. You can't be anonymous, or it's very hard for you to be anonymous as a student within the sort of the provision of your institution, but you can be anonymous on social media. So I think there are some similarities, but it's not as bad.
That's a really good point, actually, about kind of, you know, being anonymous in one format but not the other. It's not one I've kind of thought too much about, but I'm kind of thinking of my own experiences of students. I can kind of see that and kind of the pros and cons of that. So that's something for me to think about a bit more in the future. I need to finish off now, but I really want to say thank you to Marieke and Puiyin for such fantastic presentations. As I said earlier, I'm sure, you know, we've all learned a lot, and there'll be a chance to kind of follow up on this in other sessions across the week. And if people are in face-to-face in London on Friday. Once again, thank you, and thank you to everyone for their questions. Been really fantastic. And don't forget to, when this Zoom link is shut down, please go into the other Zoom link for the keynote, which is going to be on decolonisation as a driver of critical change in online and distance education. So hopefully I'll see you all there, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.